It was nearly midnight when residents along Malakote Road in Northport were abruptly jolted awake by the sound of a woman screaming for help. She was frantically knocking on her neighbors' doors, terrified and pleading for someone to contact the police. But before anyone could fully react, someone had already pulled her back toward the house. Only minutes later, the first patrol car arrived on the street. That was when an officer saw a young man drenched in blood running toward a black Chevrolet Sonic. The officer commanded him to stop. Instead, the driver accelerated and sped away. A dangerous pursuit unfolded through the streets of Northport that night, with the vehicle swerving into opposing lanes of traffic as dispatch continued receiving additional emergency calls throughout the chase. Back at the home where the suspect's vehicle had been parked, officers made a horrifying discovery. 2 people were inside, Robbie Tower and Jennifer Tower, a husband and wife. They were found lying in their own living room, surrounded by blood. Their son was missing. The same son they had adopted years earlier from a Ukrainian orphanage. At that moment, investigators still had no idea what had truly happened. But one thing was already becoming obvious. This was not simply a heated argument that had gone too far. And when the suspect was finally captured the following morning, detectives would hear an account so disturbing that it left even experienced investigators stunned. But the most terrifying detail was what he claimed about his own mother. Hey everyone, I just want to take a quick moment before we continue. I'm really interested to know where you're watching from, so leave a comment telling me your city and what time it is where you are right now. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for sharing, and with that, let's get back into the story. It was close to midnight in late August in Northport when the sound of a woman screaming for help echoed all across Malote Road.
And bang on our door and rang the doorbell, screaming, "I need help, I need help."
But before the neighbors could wake up, come outside, and understand what was unfolding, she had already disappeared. Her attacker had forcibly pulled her away from the street and dragged her back inside the house. Police arrived at the exact moment the suspect was attempting to flee. Unfortunately, for 2 of the most cherished people in that neighborhood, help had arrived too late. Inside, officers found something horrifying, the first pieces of a case that would have sounded unbelievable if it had not actually happened. Northport is a rapidly expanding city on Florida's Gulf Coast, recognized for its natural springs, freshwater canals, and convenient access to nearby beaches. Just before midnight on August 31st, 2023, a Northport resident named Jana Walton was awakened by strange sounds coming from her front entrance. At first, she heard the doorbell. Then came heavy pounding, followed by the desperate voice of a woman screaming for help. After waking her husband and confirming that her children were safe, Jana immediately called 911.
911 is the location of the emergency. I was upstairs in bed and my daughter was sleeping downstairs and someone screamed and banged on our door and rang the doorbell, screaming, "I need help, I need help." It took me a second to register what was going on.
At first, Jana Walton opened the door but found no one standing outside. Still connected with the emergency dispatcher, she chose to step out and look around once again. That was when she saw what appeared to be blood on her front doorstep, along with a trail of blood stretching down the driveway toward the street.
Did anyone in your home see her? No. We all heard her. But everything's pretty vacant around here. The house across the street is empty. The house next door is empty.
Okay.
There's only like 2 other houses on the street.
Okay. Did you only hear one voice, or did you hear more than one?
Only one. Oh, there's a whole bunch of blood outside. We need an ambulance now. Oh, shit.
Okay, I need you to lock the door and stay in the
It's locked. It's locked. It's locked. It's locked.
From the safety of their garage, the Walton family watched as police vehicles began arriving one after another on the street. Tyler Rigakis, with the Northport Police Department, was among the first officers to reach the area. As he drove his patrol car onto Malakote Road, he saw a young man wearing a light-colored tank top and red shorts getting into a small black Chevrolet Sonic. Even with the darkness surrounding the scene, the officer could clearly tell that the man was covered in blood. Rigakis announced that he was police and commanded the man to stop, but the order was ignored. The vehicle immediately accelerated and a pursuit through Northport began. Initially, Northport officers followed the black Chevy Sonic through nearby residential streets. Over the next 30 minutes, the driver continued onto Interstate 75 and crossed into another county. At least 3 officers, including accuse, remained behind the vehicle as it traveled south before turning back north along the highway. At one point, the driver crossed over into opposing traffic and began traveling in the wrong direction on the roadway. Officers continued the pursuit while remaining on the proper side of the highway. While the chase was unfolding, officers began receiving information from investigators still working at the scene on Malacote Road, 2 homes away from the Walton residence. Inside the house where the suspect's vehicle had been parked, officers discovered the homeowners, Robbie Tower and Jennifer Tower, dead inside a horrific scene covered in blood. Both husband and wife had suffered an unknown number of stab wounds. The only person missing from the home was the couple's 22-year-old son, Dimma Tower. Jana Walton told investigators that the black Chevy was the same vehicle she had watched speeding away from the area shortly after police arrived. Eventually, Sarasota County Sheriff's Office deputies were able to bring the vehicle to a stop by deploying spike strips across the roadway. The tires were destroyed. Dashcam footage showed Dimma getting out of the car and running away along the side of the road. He climbed over a fence that led onto the property of a storage facility. Beyond that area was a series of canals known to contain alligators. Officers later said they could hear movement in the water as they approached. Investigators believed Dimma had entered the canals in an attempt to hide from police. And for a period of time, that plan appeared to succeed. The search was suspended for the night, and the effort to locate Robbie and Jennifer Tower's blood-covered son continued the following morning once daylight arrived. Robbie and Jennifer Tower had been married on October 21, 2000. Jennifer began her career as a legal assistant before eventually becoming a realtor and business owner. She was a committed Christian who taught Sunday school. Both she and Robbie shared a deep love for animals, especially Rottweilers. Robbie Tower was known for his unforgettable laugh and unusual sense of humor, which often appeared through his colorful socks, graphic t-shirts, and oversized shorts. The couple was extremely well-liked throughout their neighborhood. Robbie even received the playful nickname, the Mayor of Malacote Road, because he was constantly arranging neighborhood gatherings and finding ways to bring people closer together. Robbie and Jennifer were also deeply devoted to their faith, and that belief motivated them to participate in missionary work throughout Eastern Europe and other regions around the world. Because they were unable to have biological children, they decided to build their family in another way. After visiting an orphanage in Ukraine, the Towers chose to pursue adoption. The process was lengthy, overwhelming, and incredibly costly, but Robbie and Jennifer were filled with happiness when they were finally able to bring their adopted son home. Dimma was 14 years old when the Towers adopted him. He had been born in the Luhansk Oblast, in what is now Russian-occupied eastern Ukraine. During his early years, he experienced hardship because of an alcoholic father who eventually abandoned both him and his mother. When Dimma was around 6 years old, his biological mother passed away. In the months afterward, he was moved between different relatives. He spent time living with an older brother and later with an uncle. By the time he met the 2 Americans who would become his parents, Dimma had already spent years within Ukraine's foster care system. At first, he lived in an orphanage in Luhansk that was later moved farther west as the Russian invasion expanded deeper into the area. American relatives described the orphanage where Dimma lived as essentially a prison for children. They described horrific living conditions and said Dimma displayed signs of physical abuse. When the Towers finally became parents, relatives remembered Jennifer's sincere happiness and Robbie's obvious pride in every achievement their son reached. They embraced being parents with love and enthusiasm. For Dimma, however, adjusting was challenging. He was already a teenager when he arrived in Northport and did not speak any English at the time. High school became difficult, and by 10th grade, he had completely dropped out. Despite those struggles, the family created memories together. They traveled across the country, celebrated important moments, and proudly shared pictures when Dimma became an American citizen. But additional problems were still ahead for the Tower family. Over time, conflicts with Dimma became more common. At one point, he left the home, staying with relatives, and later living independently. In 2020, police responded to the Malakote Road residence because of a domestic disturbance, although no charges were filed. Relatives later described the period before the murders as a time when the violence continued to escalate. By the time Robbie and Jennifer were murdered, Dimma had returned to the house and had been living there again for approximately 8 months. He had a job. His parents had even purchased him a small black Chevrolet Sonic, the same vehicle later seen speeding through the streets following the brutal killings. The medical examiner determined that Robbie had 68 stab wounds across his body, including injuries to his neck, chest, arms, and other areas of his upper body. Jennifer experienced a similar attack. She suffered 79 stab wounds, with most of them located around her neck. The crime scene investigation, extending from the bedroom, throughout the home, out onto the street toward the Walton residence, and then back into the Tower's living room, revealed the extent of violence that was nearly impossible to understand. Authorities had strong reason to believe the murders had been carried out by the couple's own son, the young man they had saved from terrible circumstances, adopted, and welcomed into their family with love. On the morning of September 1st, a Shell gas station employee in Nokomis named Kay Roses saw a disheveled young man covered from head to toe in dirt enter the store. He took a cold tea from the refrigerator. Kay immediately sensed that something was wrong. At that time of morning, it was already unusual to see someone entering the gas station covered in mud, but this situation felt different. Her concern increased when she accepted cash from the man and noticed that the dirt covering his skin also contained red stains. She attempted to communicate with him in English and then in Spanish, but he never responded. Only minutes later, police officers entered the store searching for Dimma Tower. Security footage from the rear parking lot showed him calmly walking away from the building before eventually coming back toward the exit. After Kay and several other witnesses reported his unusual behavior, officers quickly approached and arrested him. And once Dimma Tower was seated with detectives for questioning, they asked him to explain exactly what had happened and why the murders had taken place.
Well, something happened last night. Either you guys argued.
There's a lot of things that happen.
Regarding the first question, how the attack itself unfolded, forensic investigators at the scene had already reconstructed what they believed had happened. The blood evidence indicated that the assault was sudden and likely started inside the couple's bedroom. Robbie Tower, who was significantly larger than his son, appeared to have been completely unaware and attacked while he was asleep.
Where did it start? The bedroom. The living room.
Yep.
Was you guys sleeping?
Yep.
Did you guys have a fight prior to this?
No.
Inside the bedroom, along the north wall, investigators found obvious evidence that a violent struggle had occurred. The scene indicated that a savage and chaotic confrontation had unfolded in that area. Furniture and personal items were scattered throughout the room, blood was found across the space, and the state of the bedroom suggested a desperate battle that may have continued for an extended period of time. For detectives, this became one of the most important pieces of evidence in determining what had happened that night. The trail of evidence then moved from the bedroom into the living room, forming a horrifying route through the home. That blood trail allowed investigators to reconstruct the order of events and follow the movements of those involved throughout the attack. Officers who processed the scene later described the feeling inside the house as extremely heavy and disturbing, even for those with years of investigative experience. Ultimately, Robbie Tower was discovered in the living room. It was there, among the remains of the violence and destruction, that the final moments of this horrific tragedy unfolded.
So your dad starts getting up out of bed.
No, he wasn't. He was sleeping.
Okay. And you stabbed him.
Yeah.
Do you remember how many times?
Countless.
I'm sorry?
Countless.
Countless times. Did he ever get out of bed?
Yeah.
And then what? Did you push him against the wall? Or did he fall?
Just bleeding out. Going around the house. Trying to fight me back.
Investigators believed it was logical that Jennifer Tower woke up during the attack. They suspected she may have been awakened by the sounds of the struggle, the yelling, or the violence unfolding nearby, and attempted to intervene after realizing something terrible was happening. Everything at the scene suggested that the house had become the setting of a night filled with confusion, terror, and panic. Already suffering severe injuries, Jennifer left the home and attempted to get away. She moved across the lawn near an empty neighboring property, traveling through the darkness while likely overwhelmed and fighting to survive. Despite the extent of her injuries, she was still able to make it to Jana Walton's front door, apparently looking for assistance or somewhere she could escape the threat following her. Later, this moment became one of the most devastating parts of the entire case because it showed her final attempt to stay alive. The blood trail leading back across the driveway revealed the route she traveled as she was forced toward the house again. To investigators, it became one of the most haunting pieces of evidence from the scene, a quiet but terrifying indication of what had occurred that night. Jennifer's body was ultimately discovered in the living room next to her husband. Detectives believed that their son followed her to the neighbor's home and, while holding a knife and threatening her, made her return inside. In the investigators' opinion, this explanation matched the blood evidence and the condition of the crime scene better than any other theory. And if that interpretation was accurate, it made the entire situation even more horrifying and heartbreaking.
What happened when she ran out? Did she go out the front door?
Yep.
Did you close the door behind her, or did you?
I told her to get back inside.
And she kept on?
No, she went back inside.
At one point, did she go to the neighbors?
Yeah, that's when she went out.
Was your dad at that point?
Yeah.
Did you go back out there to get her, or?
Yes.
And you yelled at her?
No, I said, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where was she at that point? Do you remember?
He was something.
In the driveway, front door, what? Driveway.
Dimitower later told detectives that he instructed his mother to return to the house and she followed his command. Investigators said that detail was especially disturbing based on their reconstruction of what happened. Jennifer Tower did not attempt to escape or resist at that moment. Instead, she went back inside after being told to do so by her own son. Later, this part of the case became one of the most emotionally painful elements for the family and for those who followed the investigation. For a period of time, Jennifer sat on the couch as Dimma expressed years of anger, resentment, and personal frustrations toward her. According to his own account, he delivered a lengthy and emotional speech filled with bitterness and rage that had seemingly been building inside him for years. Jennifer remained there in her own living room, listening to him as the situation around her grew increasingly tense and dangerous. And after he finished speaking, he killed her. That detached sequence of events later became one of the most disturbing details of the entire case, because prosecutors argued that it demonstrated an awareness of what he was doing and showed that time existed between the anger, the conversation, and the final attack itself.
You were talking to her.
Yeah.
What was she saying back?
Pretty much nothing.
She wasn't crying, pleading for her life or anything.
She was.
She was.
When detectives questioned Dimma Tower about what caused him to murder his parents with such extreme violence, he provided several different and sometimes conflicting explanations. During the interview, his reasons continued to shift. His answers came in pieces and frequently created even more uncertainty for investigators. Detectives attempted to determine what had fueled the attack, but Dimma either could not or refused to provide a straightforward explanation for what he had done. Most of the time, he claimed that everything was too complicated, that nobody else would ever truly understand him, or that he simply did not have enough time to explain everything. His answers came across as detached, emotionally closed off, and completely exhausted. At certain points, investigators felt that he was intentionally avoiding a direct discussion about the actual motives behind the murders, instead relying on vague remarks and incomplete thoughts. For detectives and everyone connected to the case, those responses only added to the existing tension and emotional confusion surrounding the investigation. But perhaps the most direct, simplest, and most disturbing answer he gave was reduced to one word: rage. That single word, without justification or lengthy explanation, appeared to represent the emotion that had been growing inside him for years before eventually exploding into horrific violence.
Help me understand what happened.
Rage.
Rage has to come from somewhere, so there has to be some reason. It's a lot of rage to keep bottled up.
Right?
Did your parents push you into the rage?
We won't live like family anymore.
They weren't family anymore?
Yeah.
Did they change?
We've been through so much shit.
Yeah.
Been arguing, going back and forth.
So about what?
Family issues.
So have you had these thoughts for most of your life as a...
No.
No.
Just came up because of all the anger and all the... Yeah, I wanna go back to the grind.
Yeah.
That's treason that...
Did you ask them, did you say that to your parents that you were going to go back to Ukraine, and did they put up a fight with you or something?
No, it's not that.
No.
Dimma Tower began speaking about the United States and his life there with increasing bitterness and resentment. Based on the way he described things, investigators believed that over time, both his adoptive family and the country where he had spent much of his life had lost their importance to him. His words came across as angry, disconnected, and emotionally worn down. According to detectives, more and more resentment had been building inside him, and he spoke as though he wanted to completely separate himself from everything around him. At the time, the 22-year-old did not have any clear or realistic plan to return to his homeland, which was still facing an ongoing war. However, he continued expressing a desire to leave his current life behind. At the same time, he was never able to clearly explain why he believed his parents were stopping him from creating a new life somewhere else. His explanations remained inconsistent and incomplete. Most often, he returned to the same statement again and again that they had stopped being a family. Those words carried an especially cold and distant meaning, considering that Robbie Tower and Jennifer Tower had spent years trying to provide him with support and a secure home. According to those who knew the family, Robbie and Jennifer truly did have frequent arguments. Problems within their marriage had continued developing over the years, and Dimma was often involved in those disagreements. His behavior, the ongoing issues within the family, and the constant emotional pressure created a difficult environment inside the home that slowly affected everyone. Dimma himself claimed that whenever one of his parents supported him during arguments, it was usually Jennifer. According to him, she was the parent who more often tried to understand him and calm things down. At the same time, he claimed that Robbie blamed him for ruining the marriage. And while there is no way to determine exactly how accurate those statements were, they showed the level of emotional conflict and separation that had grown within the family long before the tragedy took place.
What was the reason to kill your parents?
Marriages.
Can you give us one reason?
I don't like him.
Dimmitauer had been considering the murders before they actually happened. During interviews and discussions with detectives, he admitted that the thoughts of killing his parents first entered his mind earlier that same evening after he came home. According to investigators, those statements became one of the most disturbing elements of the entire case because they appeared to show that the intention existed before the attack ever took place. He said that at first he sat alone in his car outside the house, thinking about it while sitting in the darkness. Later, he went upstairs to his bedroom where he continued drinking whiskey. And according to his own account, those thoughts never disappeared. Instead, they remained with him. This part of the case was especially troubling because it suggested there was a period of time between when the idea first entered his mind and when the actual attack began, a period when he could have stopped and chosen not to act on those thoughts. For investigators and prosecutors, these statements became critically important because they challenged any claim that the killings were only the result of a sudden emotional collapse or a moment of uncontrollable anger. Instead, based on his own descriptions, the thoughts of murder had formed before any confrontation began and stayed with him throughout the evening until they eventually turned into a deliberate decision.
So were you having those thoughts when you were in the bedroom and that?
Yep.
Did they start while you were in the car?
Yep.
So you start having the thoughts in the car, you go into the house, you go into your bedroom, and you continue to have the thoughts, and what happens with that thing?
Well, you know what?
Yeah, did something trigger it, or did you just say, I'm doing it?
I'm doing.
So you go over to the kitchen and you get the knife out of the butcher block,
Yep.
and then you went straight to your dad.
Mm-hmm.
Did you pick your dad because you knew that you have to disable him first?
Yep.
And was mom sleeping in bed next to dad?
Yep. Sounds crazy, doesn't it?
Well, it's your story, so.
Well, it's still a pretty easy story.
2 knives were involved in the attack. Investigators later discovered one of them behind a bedside table in a location that immediately drew their attention as they examined the crime scene. Dimmitauer later claimed that during the assault, the knife had slipped from his hand and disappeared. The way he explained it appeared unusually calm and almost casual given the horrifying events that had taken place that night. But even after the first knife was gone, he did not stop. Rather than ending the attack, Dimmer returned to the kitchen, took another knife, and continued stabbing his parents. Later, investigators identified that moment as one of the most significant parts of the case because prosecutors believed it demonstrated conscious decision-making and showed that he had the opportunity to stop or continue. According to the prosecution, Dimmer made the choice to continue. During their search of the home, investigators also discovered dirty water on the kitchen counter near the sink with a towel nearby. Considering the circumstances of the crime scene, those details immediately drew attention. Beside the sink was a knife block, and experts later found Dimmer's DNA on the handle of the second knife. For investigators, this became another important piece of evidence, connecting him directly to the weapon used during the attack. Although it appeared that someone had attempted to wash the knife and return it to the holder, blood was still present on the blade. That discovery further increased investigators' belief that someone had tried to remove evidence after the murders. Even though there were signs the weapon had been cleaned, the physical evidence still preserved what would become one of the most important pieces of proof in the case. After his arrest, Dimma was taken to the Sarasota County Jail while awaiting trial. He remained there as investigators continued collecting evidence and preparing the prosecution's case. Initially, he faced charges of 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of fleeing law enforcement. However, after reviewing the statements Dimma gave during interviews, along with the extreme violence of the killings, investigators began to believe that regardless of any possible mental health concerns, the crime showed evidence of planning and intentional action. Prosecutors placed particular emphasis on the fact that the attack continued even after the first knife was lost. Eventually, a grand jury indicted Dimma Tower on 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. This meant prosecutors officially considered the killings to be intentional and calculated acts rather than a spontaneous crime committed in a moment of uncontrolled anger. The trial in this highly publicized and deeply tragic case began in November 2025.
He was fed up with this country and the bullshit that this country had to offer him. And his parents, they were a part of that. And he didn't like them as people anymore. And so he knew he would kill them.
Dimma Tower's troubled childhood, much of which he spent as an orphan who was reportedly subjected to abuse, was ultimately considered inadmissible in the trial. Although his past may have provided insight into certain parts of his behavior or psychological state, the jury was not permitted to hear detailed accounts of what happened to him before he arrived in the United States. The court restricted discussion of his life overseas, determining that those circumstances were not directly relevant to deciding whether he was guilty of the murders themselves. At the same time, another limitation was placed on the case as well. Because information about his traumatic childhood was excluded, details regarding his aggressive behavior after moving to Northport were also mostly prevented from being introduced during the trial. Because of that, a substantial amount of information about his personality and actions never reached the courtroom, despite the fact that people who knew him personally described him in a very different way. Former classmates recalled his behavior as disturbing, unusual, and extremely antisocial. According to them, he kept himself apart from others, rarely communicated with anyone, and appeared to deliberately distance himself from the people around him. They said he would frequently disappear alone into nearby wooded areas, spending extended periods of time there by himself. And when he did interact with other students, those who remembered him claimed that he often behaved like a bully, acting aggressively, intimidating others, and treating people harshly. Years before the tragedy occurred, many people said that simply being around him made them feel uneasy. Relatives also described Dimma developing an interest in boxing, but in their view, it was not motivated by discipline or athletic achievement. They believed he was drawn to it because he enjoyed hitting things and expressing his anger physically. After the murders, those memories became much more disturbing when viewed in hindsight. And compared with all of this, the selfless reasons Robbie Tower and Jennifer Tower had for adopting their son felt even more heartbreaking. They wanted to provide him with a home, support, and the opportunity for a different future. But ultimately, none of that was enough to overcome the deep anger and inner darkness that, according to many people close to the case, he appeared to have carried within him for years.
Maybe I can give a little bit of my personal background or something.
Mr. Tower, the way it's going to work the same with all witnesses. You need to listen to the question and then answer only the question that's been asked of you, okay?
Well, it's important that...
It may be important, but you need to follow the rules in a courtroom, okay? Please ask your next question.
Sure. Did you go to school here in Sarasota County?
The questions that you're asking me are very complicated, and cannot be simply answered, but I'm forced to simply answer the questions, which cannot, for no right reason, can be answered simply. These are not simple questions.
Do you need a moment, Mr. Tower?
Remember the jurors, let's take a break. Please leave your notepads face down, writing information on top. Please don't discuss anything related to your jury. Everybody stand, jurors exiting.
The trial was filled with repeated emotional outbursts and a level of tension that remained present during nearly every court appearance. Inside the courtroom, there was often an atmosphere of disorder and ongoing conflict, with much of the attention repeatedly focused on Dimitower's own behavior. In many ways, he influenced the tone of the entire trial. Through his actions, he demonstrated an obvious unwillingness to follow the court's directions or comply with the rules placed on him. His reactions frequently appeared tense, anxious, and occasionally unpredictable, adding even more pressure to an already emotionally charged environment. Despite this, Dimma eventually decided to testify in his own defense. However, even while giving testimony, the atmosphere remained tense and unstable. He argued not only with prosecutors and the judge, but at times also challenged questions from his own defense attorney, creating the impression that he was unwilling to cooperate even with those working to defend him. His responses often seemed incomplete, emotional, and difficult to follow, while the tension during questioning continued to increase. At certain points, he began telling the judge that he was being prevented from discussing subjects he personally believed were important to the case. It was clear that this was something that deeply upset him. Throughout much of the proceedings, he remained seated with his head down, breathing heavily into the microphone, and even that sound seemed to add to the heavy and uncomfortable atmosphere inside the courtroom. His overall demeanor appeared strained, exhausted, and emotionally unstable as everyone present watched his every movement and reaction throughout the lengthy and draining trial.
Maybe I can give a little bit of my personal background or something.
Mr. Tower, the way it's going to work the same with all witnesses. You need to listen to the question and then answer only the question that's been asked of you, okay?
Well, it's important that...
It may be important, but you need to follow the rules in the courtroom, okay? Please ask your next question.
Sure. Did you go to school here in Sarasota County?
The questions that you're asking me are very complicated, and cannot be simply answered, but I'm forced to simply answer the questions, which cannot, for no right reason, can be answered simply. These are not simple questions.
Do you need a moment, Mr. Tower?
Remember the jurors, let's take a break. Please leave your notepads face down, writing information on top. Please don't discuss anything related to your jury. Everybody stand, jurors exiting.
It appeared highly unlikely that Dimitower's testimony generated much sympathy or understanding from the jurors. While on the witness stand, he attempted to explain his actions by claiming that he had been intoxicated when he confessed to detectives. He also argued that during the murders, he had entered a temporary state of insanity and was not completely aware of what he was doing. However, his statements often appeared inconsistent and seemed to create even more questions, especially when compared with all the evidence and testimony the jury had already heard throughout the trial. The official strategy of the defense focused on convincing jurors that the killings were crimes of passion, meaning they were acts committed during an intense emotional moment rather than planned and deliberate murders. His attorneys attempted to portray the tragedy as the result of a sudden emotional outburst instead of a conscious choice. That became the central argument of the defense throughout the proceedings. But even through Dimma's own testimony, a very different picture appeared to develop. Despite efforts to reduce the appearance of intent behind the killings, his own words indicated that thoughts of murdering his parents had existed before the attack actually began. And even if, as the defense argued, he had not prepared every detail ahead of time, the fact that those thoughts appeared beforehand significantly weakened the claim that this was only a spontaneous emotional collapse. That point likely became one of the most important factors the jury considered when reaching its final verdict.
Do you remember talking with them about multiple times having thoughts of killing your parents?
Yeah, I only had those thoughts a couple times.
Okay. Did you ever have a plan in place to make that happen?
No, I did not.
So you said you didn't think about killing your parents.
I did not plan on it.
Mr. Tower,
It was not premeditated.
Mr. Tower, what were you thinking about between the time you took that sharp knife, walked into your parents' bedroom, and started to stab your father in the dark?
I wasn't thinking anything.
You weren't thinking anything.
What is there to think?
When you were sitting out in your car before you went into the house on the night of August 31st, did you decide to kill your parents before you walked in?
Yes.
I don't have anything else. Thank you, Your Honor.
The jury ultimately found Dimatower guilty on every charge. After a lengthy and emotionally draining trial filled with intense testimony and difficult courtroom moments, the verdict became the final legal outcome in a case that caused immense suffering and drew significant public attention. Inside the courtroom, a deep silence fell over the room, and the tension that had grown throughout the entire process seemed almost impossible to ignore. During the sentencing phase, the loved ones of Robbie Tower and Jennifer Tower were given the chance to address the court and share memories of the people they were in life. Family members described the many qualities that made the couple so special: their kindness, honesty, compassion, and their willingness to support others even through challenging moments. They spoke about the warmth Robbie and Jennifer brought into the lives of those around them and the deep love that existed within their family. But together with those memories came overwhelming heartbreak from losing them. For their loved ones, this was never simply a legal proceeding or the conclusion of a criminal case. It was the painful reality of having to move forward without the people they cared about most. And with every word spoken inside the courtroom, the full weight of the tragedy became impossible to overlook once again.
They had a love for the Ukrainian people. And so I was not completely surprised when Jen told me about Dima. She beamed. I can promise you that she could not have loved you more, Dima, than if she gave birth to you herself.
They chose to love Dima and to bring him into their lives. They wanted to make him a somebody and gave him their name.
Robbie Tower's father used his statement in court not to talk about forgiveness or healing, but instead to talk about revenge, about the anger and suffering that had continued building inside him since the tragedy destroyed his family. His voice was filled with emotion, and every word reflected the pain of a man who had lost both his son and daughter-in-law under unimaginably violent circumstances. The atmosphere inside the courtroom at that moment was extremely tense, and it was impossible to ignore how deeply the family was still affected by what had happened. Despite the rules of the courtroom, he wanted to speak directly to his grandson. To him, this was not simply a statement delivered for the judge or those sitting inside the courtroom. It was an opportunity to say something directly to the person at the center of the devastating case, the individual who had permanently changed the lives of everyone in the family.
Dima, look at me.
No, sir, you go ahead and direct your comments to me, okay?
I would like him to change his name while he's in jail. I don't want him to use my name anymore. I don't want him to be associated with us. And a lot of things I want to say to you, to him.
Take your time.
I don't believe you'd allow it, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't think I could go any further.
Dimatower was given one final opportunity to address the court, a moment the family had been waiting for with painful expectation, Many hoped this would finally be the time when he expressed even a small amount of sincere remorse, recognized the destruction he had caused, and offered words that could help Jennifer Tower and Robbie Tower's loved ones find some form of emotional closure after everything they had suffered. After all the pain they had experienced, the family wanted to hear some acknowledgement of responsibility, even the smallest indication of compassion or humanity. But that moment never came. Instead, Dima gave a strange, unclear, and emotionally distant statement about accountability. His words were vague and appeared to create even more uncertainty and tension inside the courtroom. At certain points, it seemed as though he was attempting to place some responsibility onto his grandparents, including the parents of Jennifer and Robbie. For many people inside the courtroom, those remarks were shocking and deeply hurtful, especially given everything the victim's family had already been forced to endure.
And my apology in this is that nobody want to be held accountable for their actions. And I'm being held accountable for the actions of grown men. So my apology is that I have to be responsible for what Oscar did to his children and what Phil did to his children. And how can I apologize for the mistreatment that Oscar, as a stepfather.
All right, I'm going to have the defendant removed from the stand. He's choosing not to give an apology.
The judge sentenced Dima Tower to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. According to the court's decision, the sentences would be served one after another, meaning he would never have the opportunity to be released. The atmosphere inside the courtroom remained heavy and tense as the punishment was announced, and the ruling became the final legal chapter in a case that had attracted widespread public attention and left lasting emotional damage. In addition to the life sentences, he was also sentenced to another 5 years in prison for fleeing from police. The court treated the pursuit as a separate offense, adding further consequences to the severity of his overall sentence.
Don't know what else to say. You seem to be an evil spirit, an evil person.
Evil spirit because you're talking foolish.
Who doesn't seem to have any...
I'm full of remorse. I'm not showing it.
Jennifer Tower and Robbie Tower were remembered by those who knew them as deeply kind, sincere, and selfless people, the type of individuals who made others feel valued, supported, and cared for simply through their presence. Friends and family described them as a couple defined by compassion, warmth, and genuine humanity. They were always ready to help those facing difficult situations or anyone who needed encouragement and support. To many people, they represented the kind of individuals who did not simply speak about kindness, but showed it through the way they lived every day. The couple dedicated their free time, personal efforts, and their own finances to missionary trips to Russia and Ukraine. These were not merely brief visits or symbolic acts of charity. They truly wanted to make a difference, help people experiencing hardship, and stand beside those who needed assistance the most. People close to Jennifer and Robbie often said that they genuinely loved Ukraine, its culture, its environment, and its people. That sincere compassion and commitment to helping others became one of the reasons they left such a lasting impression on everyone whose lives they influenced. And ultimately, that is how the story of Robbie and Jennifer Tower continued to be remembered, not because of attention or dramatic words, but because of the kindness they dedicated themselves to bringing into the lives of others.